For what it's worth, we're exploring what we believe are some core values of Dayspring Wesleyan Church. If we're going to convey value to all people of every phase of life, we need to understand what it is we have to offer them that does convey value directly. So Pastor Chuck the last few weeks talked about giving, how that's a value that conveys value to people. How service last week is a value that conveys value. We're going to explore another one today. Before that, I want you to know that kind of a monumental week coming up. In 2 days, I will have been a parent for 17 years. I've aged well, haven't I, Jan? I've aged pretty good. Yeah, fair enough, good. Thumbs up. I ask people it's safe to ask who I know they live, and I come after them, they say wrong things. It's weird now. I'm still figuring out how to be a dad of teenagers. Just when you think you figured out with a boy, then you had girls and hormones. And it changes things, right? But what's fun now is to spend time with people who are years behind us, trying to figure out things for the first time. My wife got sick this past week, so I had the honor of, and they're here, and baby's here, I had the honor of delivering, not a baby, but food to Cortez and Holly Swain because they just had their first daughter, Zendaya, which I was shocked because all this time we thought the name was going to be Bo Nicole Swain. That's my wife's name. And we're at the house. They're at our house every Sunday night. So when I saw her, I was like, oh, hi, Bo Nicole. I'll learn your nickname. It's just fine. But Zendaya, healthy baby, but I got to take the food to them. And as I'm sitting holding this 10-pound mass of humanity, and she was wide awake. It was just really wonderful. It was fun to listen in Cortez and Holly because a couple weeks before they had the baby, they're at our house on Sunday night with the Edge. And we talk about sports, we talk about food, we talk about family. And now the conversation has changed. Now we're talking about who gets up in the middle of the night. Now we're talking about how much more expensive things are. Now we're talking about how we have to change clothes a lot because of vomit. Now we're talking about the color of infant poo. Right, we did. I'm just trying to be honest, people, all right? It's fun to listen to because now when I sit and realize it doesn't matter how many books you read, how many YouTube things you watch, how much advice you get, you really don't know until you get there, right? And then you have to make a lot of decisions. You have to decide what kind of environment are we going to make for our child? What kind of home is this going to be? You have a choice. Is this going to be a safe home where they can grow up to become everything God made them to be? Or am I just going to be a dad who feeds them, changes a diaper, and hopes they figure it out on their own? You could say, well, what kind of dad would do that? Well, you really do have a choice, whether it's intentional or not, what kind of home you're going to create. And you ask any social worker, any teacher, any foster parent, right? There are parents that make homes that don't intentionally foster a safe environment where kids feel like they belong and become everything God made them to be. There's a term for this. The safe place, and it has a distinct purpose too. It's the word community. Now, the reason why Dayspring desires to show value to all people, all phases of life is we believe that's what God has asked us to do, and we believe community is something that conveys value to people. And not only that, what's really neat about community is that it not only conveys value, but it instills value in people also. It changes not only the culture of the environment, community changes the individual receiving community, but it also changes the person giving and offering that community. So why are we talking about family? I thought this is about church. Well, in case you haven't noticed, Dayspring right now seems to be having a family. If you came several months ago, you might have felt like you had a buffer of 3 to 4 seats between you and the next person. That buffer has shrunk to maybe 1 or 2 seats, fair? Some of you aren't sitting in your seat because someone took your seat and didn't know it was your seat. I had a cool conversation. I won't even look. They're here. I won't even look at them. one time at the beginning of the service, they were walking around back and they were walking around that side of the church, but I knew they sat on this side of the church. I said, someone take your seat. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. But one of them finally said, no, I'm letting my wife and child decide where we sit today. That was kind. I knew their seat was taken though, but they handled it very well. Just come earlier. You get your seat. And things change when you start having a family. We got the youth room that is starting to grow. We got the kids room that's bursting at the seams. And we got Pastor Alex and Pastor Dylan who are just doing knockout jobs. Our adult ministries are growing too. Prime Timers last week exploded with new people in it. And the work of Pastor Colleen Fine and Pastor Chuck to keep nurturing this discipleship, people in life groups and discipleship programs keeps growing as well. We're having a family here at Dayspring. Now, before we delve into Scripture though, I want you to think back when you first started having your family or around families. We can talk about how beautiful it was, but do you remember how hard it was? Cortez and Holly, every single waking moment, how hard it is to start having your family. You went from getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep to 5 or 6 interrupted hours of sleep. You went from one wardrobe in the morning that you change into for work, then come home and then you're done, to change your shirt 2 or 3 times because you got projectile vomiters. I had 3. And finally I said, forget this badge of honor. I'm going to live with it. You went from a budget that was somewhat reasonable to adding formula and diapers. It adds up. It kind of dents your budget. You went from, oh, we're just going to go out real quick to, oh, wait, we got to find a babysitter. We got to get the car seat ready. We got to pack the bag. We've got to make sure all the formula's in there. Oh, wait, do we need to put a coat on the baby? Can we just put stuff over the top of the car seat? It just gets more complicated. But that didn't change, remember? Think back. That didn't change how much you wanted so much good for your family. So amidst the pains of what we might be experiencing here of, well, I don't know anybody anymore. I don't know all these people. They took my seat. How can I rent the community room and fireside room? It's impossible to rent it anymore because everyone else is using it. Yes, there are growing pains. But if you remember how much you wanted for your family and wanted it to maybe grow by children or grow at least as far as being a safe place where everyone felt like it belonged, this is exactly what Jesus wants for Dayspring. The last words of Jesus were, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them everything I have commanded you. Jesus' last command to us was grow my family. And just as much as it might hurt sometimes, I pray that by the time we're done today, that God keeps shaping your heart and your mind so that you can feel what he feels and see what he sees, and ultimately want what he wants for this place. And it doesn't begin with pastors and staff, it begins with us all. All right? When I was growing up in little Amish country, I was in Berlin, Ohio. We lived in a suburb of Berlin. There's not suburbs. It was a neighborhood on the outskirts of Berlin on a street, and we knew everybody in our little area. We were on the corner where the road kind of curved. Back behind us, I remember we're in Amish country. Would you believe the family behind us? Their last name was Yoder. Okay, the Yoders lived behind us. They had Craig and Sheila. They were a lot older than us. Craig was probably 7 years older, and he was the younger of the two. So we didn't spend a lot of time together. But when we had community softball games, which was Craig and me against Matt and Nevin, there's 4 of us playing softball together. We played. Beside us were the Marners, where you had 2 kids that were, one was my age, Eric, and then Jamie was about my sister's age, about 4 years younger. We played all summer together. Dad even built this really cool treehouse with a slide and a house on top and a pole to slide down. The other side of us are Dwayne and Vivian, Miller, Amish country. Beside us, there was another set of grandparents for us, had a cool tree house down in the woods by the creek. Just up the road were Bill and Judy and their daughter Molly. Molly was about 3 years older than me. I remember going and roller skating in her basement to a record of Michael Jackson's Thriller. And she had strawberry shortcake skates. I don't know why I remember things that just don't matter. I don't think I turned in my man card and wore those at the time, but I might have. Up beside him, I don't remember their names, but his nickname was Yowzer. Don't know why. He was another older couple that he just passed away a few years ago. He had dementia and Alzheimer's. Across the street from us were Dale and Cynthia Stutzman, and they had 3 kids. 2 were older. Matt was one of the boys that played softball with us, but Emily was 1 year older than me. They were all two adopted. 2 of the kids were adopted. Emily and I played basketball in the summer, and it was frustrating because she always beat me. But it was not just frustrating, it was embarrassing because she was a cheerleader. Once I got a little more height, took care of that, all right? Beside them were Mike and Marlene Yoder. Then beside them were Art and Jolene, Yoder. And beside them, I don't remember her last name, her name was Amanda. She was an older conservative, single conservative Mennonite lady. Now, those were our neighborhood. Sometimes we would get permission. We didn't have a police department. I don't think we asked permission. We just did it. We put barricades at the end of our roads, and we had a street party. We had barbecue together. We'd ride our bicycles and big wheels on the road. We would spend all afternoon together. But down the street, 2 doors down, past the Marners, was one more house. It was the Emmons family. I never knew the Emmons family. I only knew they were the Emmons family because there was a sign on their house. If I walked down the street in my neighborhood and saw them, I would not know them. I don't know if they had any kids. I saw kids there every now and then, but they were never at our school. So maybe they were nieces and nephews or grandkids, don't know. See, we lived in a community, but we didn't know them. One of the main things you got to start learning about community from the get-go is that just because you live in a community doesn't mean you live in community. Community is more than proximity. It's not just being beside someone. There's a term that Paul uses in the New Testament calling us a community of faith, a community of believers. But listen, it's only community here in the sense that we might be sitting by each other, but is it community in that we offer and receive community from each other? Community in the sense that Jesus and Paul and all the New Testament writers are calling for is more than just being together in the same room for an hour worshiping the same God. It goes beyond that. It's like if you're a dad. If I was a dad, I am a dad, but if I was a dad that was in the home but never changed my kid's diaper, never got him food, abused my kids, you would say, well, you're biologically a dad, but you're not really a father, right? I'm married. Been married a little over 19 years. If I was a husband that was verbally abusive, withheld money from my wife, withheld sex from my wife, just wasn't present a lot in my wife's life, you would say, well, yeah, you're legally her husband, but you're not much of a husband. Same goes for community. You can be in the same building as someone and be in community as far as proximity is concerned, but the community we're going to see God calls us to goes beyond just being around people of like minds and like hearts. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go through a lot of a list of things that kind of define what community is. Throughout Jesus' teachings and Paul's teaching in the New Testament, there are a lot of one another statements. So rather than reading a text that shows community specifically, we're going to talk about what community looks like according to Jesus. What are we targeting in this room? What does it take for me and us to build that safe environment where people feel, not just say they belong, but feel like they belong and become the people God has created them to become? So I'm going to go through this list pretty rapidly. They're in your notes. And if you have your notes, I want you to write them down, because at the end, we're going to spend 2 minutes of quiet and you're going to listen and see which of this list God might be calling you to starting today and through this week to start living out community in this building, maybe at home, maybe at work, maybe in your schools. Okay? So we're going to crack through them also. Beside every one of them, there's the passages of scriptures that help also elaborate on them. I believe that the sermon doesn't need to stop here. I believe the sermon needs to keep speaking, not because it's me, but because it's Jesus Christ at work in his word through us here. Take it home. Open up one a day and read through it and see the context of what it looks like to actually become this one anothering person living in community as God has called us to. So here we go. I'm going to go through this list pretty quickly. I'll give you time to catch along, okay? First one, Jesus' words. Love one another. Next one, show honor to one another. Live at peace with one another. Now, we're going to learn in a few weeks when we get closer to Christmas, there's a difference between, there is a real peace and there is a fake peace we can live out in our homes. Just the absence of arguing and fighting does not mean there's peace or the absence of inner turmoil in your home. We're talking about the fullness of peace, all right? We'll get into that some other week. Be honest with one another. Submit to one another. In other words, pick your battles. You don't need to be right all the time. In fact, I'd say if we sat down today and at the end of the day and you write down all your arguments you had, I'm going to guess that 90% of them really didn't matter. Except for the fact it mattered because you wanted to be right and prove that they were wrong. Just submit to someone and you might find they got something good to say. Agree with one another. Not about everything, you're not going to. But agree about the core things. And just by sitting in this room, we can already agree that we believe in the same God, the same Christ, and the same Spirit at work in us. Let's start with that. But sometimes just submit, humble yourself before somebody else. And you might find, I am wrong. And it's not so bad after all to follow what they're doing. Serve one another. Not just serve with one another, serve each other as well. Saw a beautiful example of that just yesterday. Where we moved my brother-in-law, Wes, to his new home. And a bunch of people, SoulCon people, which I'll explain a little bit in just a second, showed up and started serving, helping him move. It took us from 8 a.m. till about 3:15, just in time for the Buckeyes game, believe it or not. Wes didn't even know some of the people. And some of the people didn't even know Wes. It's like, well, we're called to serve each other. And they lived it out yesterday. Bear one another's burdens. Forgive one another. Encourage one another. Confess to one another. That means you might have to admit you're wrong. Doesn't mean you were, okay, let that go. Pray for one another. All right, that's our list. Now, what we're going to do is as we look through this list, we can learn something about the nature of community as well that will show us not only why these are important, but why this might be different than the community we might have been looking for or offering as a church for many years. First of all, from all of these, we find out where you need to find out, community can only be authentic. You can't fake any of the things that we just listed. You can act, but to get the fullness of community, you cannot fake these. You cannot fake peace. You cannot argue in the home. But it doesn't mean you're still not fuming with anger at your spouse, holding in something that might come out down the road. That does not mean you're living at peace, and therefore you're not living in community. You can say, I forgive you. That is a gift from God to forgive someone. But you can say, I forgive you, but if it hasn't changed your heart before you say, I forgive you, you will never pursue them and try to reconcile, which is the end game. And I will just say, I met a couple here today which just shared with me how they reconciled between a sibling after decades of not talking. And they were able to forgive. And they're discovering all God has in store for them as they're rebuilding community in their family. It's possible. Honesty is really at the center of all this. To being transparent with people around you. Babies are brilliant. Babies are probably the most honest creatures on earth, aren't they? When they're hungry, they tell you. When they're tired, they tell you. When they stink, they tell you, and you probably know it too. Now, it's not in words. But it's with their screams, with their cries. And here's the beauty of it. Because they are honest about how they feel, we're able to meet their needs. We're able to build trust in them. They know then that they can cry and their food will be there. They know that they can cry and they will be comforted. They know that they can cry and they will be changed. If we aren't honest in community, how can we really know how to meet each other's needs and grow in our trust for each other? I remember hearing about orphanages internationally. And some people would adopt, they went to an orphanage and they were shocked at this orphanage of just tons of kids. And they say, why is it so quiet in here? There's babies all over the place. Why are they not crying? And they basically said they're not crying because they cry so much and don't have their needs met that they quit because crying's not working. Start being honest, and we can start meeting the needs of people in this church. Start being authentic about who you are and what your needs are, and we can start working things out. Now, in this list, not a single one listed of the one another's are natural, are they? You probably went through, it's like, I'm not good at that, not good at that. And then your wife goes, nope, you're not good at that. It's just, they go against who we are. So we learn from this that not only is living in community unnatural, it's also an unnatural but intentional act that we move towards. I'll admit, going through the list, I fail miserably or weak at quite a few of them. Right now, I reference it briefly. There's this men's group called SoulCon taking place here at the church right now. I believe, Brian, you said about 27 men. And what we don't have listed are the wives that are some of them, like my wife, who are doing it with us as well. It's a group of men who are doing this program that affects their physical discipline, their eating discipline, also their spiritual discipline, and really developing community amongst themselves. And what you're seeing happening or hearing happening in the church right now is a lot of complaining. Because we can't drink coffee with creamer right now. It is awful. We're doing a bunch of things that work against how we're wired. It's not natural for a man to sit with a group of men and share about their problems with pornography and share about their struggles at home with their spouses and share about their insecurities as a dad. That's not natural, but they're doing it. It's not natural for me to not eat anything after 9 o'clock at night. I like to snack. It's not natural for me to have a little coffee with my creamer every day. But I muscle it down. But here's why it matters. I'm saying this not to brag, but saying it works. Community is an unnatural but intentional act we need to participate in. One of the things I ask you to do that you can do if you want is to give up pop. I love Mountain Dew. Now, about 7 years ago, I decided to give up Mountain Dew, cold turkey. And I took up Diet Mountain Dew. A little bit, it's healthier, right? So I started drinking Diet Mountain Dew. I do 1, 2-ish cans a day. And then this SoulCon thing happens, and one of the things they challenge you to do is give up pop for this 6-week challenge. So I decided to not do it. I haven't had a pop since the day before Labor Day. And I don't miss it. I don't have an hankering. I don't have an urge. It's weird. See, what happens is when you start working in this unnatural activity, but doing it intentionally, God has a way of slowly reprogramming you to where the unnatural becomes a second nature. If you'd have told me 5 months ago, that I would not have an urge for pop, I'd have thought you were out of your mind. I can't explain it. But it took that 6 weeks of reprogramming, finding some motivation beyond myself, and it's changed me. And I'm trusting that the devotions each day and the push-ups each day and the 5K twice a week is going to change me as well. But it takes the discipline of actually doing these things to create this culture of community that God has called us to. And I'm seeing it happening in the group of men who are called SoulCon together. Now, nowhere in these, or in this list of one another statements, do you see indication of who gets to choose you're in community with? You don't get to choose who gets your community. It's just one another. You give and you receive. We are naturally drawn to people, though, aren't we, who have like interests in us. We like to spend time with people who like to do the same things that we do. But the challenge is we are also drawn to people we naturally feel safe with and aren't apt to look beyond our closed circles already. But it is God who builds community. It's God who shapes community. And it's God who directs us who to build that community with. I may not like the same music as you do, but I'll spend time with you. I may not like to fish like you do, but God's called me community with you. I hate to fish, by the way. You might know everything about mechanics and cars and stuff. I know jack squat, but it doesn't mean I can't live in community with you. You might be a techie, know all kinds of stuff about computers. I know how to turn it on and type a bit. It doesn't mean we can't live in community with each other. God calls us to these things. On top of that, like I said, what you don't see in this either is who makes the first move in building community. It says one another. See, on top of this, you don't get to wait on community. You are called to build community. If everyone in this room is proactive in finding community, everyone will find community. You're not called to sit and wait at your seat till some new person shows up and said, hey, can we spend time together? And you're not asked to say, well, I'm a new person. I got to wait for someone to come and reach out to me and invite me into their lives. No. If you're part of what God is doing here, we are mutually called to pursue each other, one another. I'm called to love you and not wait on you to love me back. You're called to submit to me and not wait on me to submit to you back. Man, could you imagine what our homes might look like? If a husband would stop waiting for a wife to honor him and honor her instead. If a wife would stop waiting for her husband to be honest with her and be honest with him regardless, we start pursuing each other. You don't get to choose. You don't get to wait. We are all mutually pursuers of each other and pursuers of those outside these walls who are longing for the very thing God has given us. I'm pointing all this stuff out because Dayspring's having a family. And we need to change how we feel about being intentional about building a community where you don't just see each other once a week, but you're a part of 3, 4, 5 people's lives. And those of you who've gone through darkness knows how important that is in darkness, so we build that in the light. So when darkness hits, we are prepared and we are strong by those around us. I say this too to those of you who are new to Dayspring, that we're still navigating this community stuff. We've been around for a while, and I've been a Christian for pushing 35 years. I'm still learning what community really looks like. So I'm asking you, that's not an excuse for how we might act or might not be acting, but it does explain we are growing. We want to show value to you through our community. We're still trying to figure this out, so hang in with us. But if you're new here, don't wait on us to figure it out. Invite yourself into our world as we try to invite you into ours as well. Don't wait for someone to find you here in a pew. Go find Colleen out there and find a life group. Find the person beside you, ask questions, or ask them out to lunch afterwards, or invite them home. You might have a little more roast, or shoot, just go grab Payne's and enjoy a conversation with someone here you don't know. It's a $10, $15 gift you can give to someone today. Doing it together. So, if you're one of those obsessive people, we'll get to the last blank in a bit. But this is the part where I want to give you a space. 2 minutes of silence. It will feel awkward. But I want you to give space for God to speak to you and look through your list. You will not be able to offer all of those. That is, if you're struck with lightning or God just touches you and you're a new person right here, yes, you might be that by the end of the day. But this is a process. Don't beat yourself up for what you aren't, but ask God, what do you need from me now? Which of these lists of one another's do you want me to pursue this week? And so we're going to have quiet and see what God asks you to do. Because I believe God still speaks. And I believe we don't hear him because, one, we don't give him space like this 2 minutes to listen. And two, we want him to say something. And when he doesn't say that something, we believe he hasn't spoken at all or he's wrong. So what is one thing on the list God is showing you to work on for this next week? There's a passage in the Bible, in the book of Acts, when the church just gets launched after Jesus leaves. And it provides for us the clearest image of what community can and should look like when people don't just live in proximity, but they are invested in each other's life with intense authenticity and intentionality. And I want you to listen to the text. It'll be up on the screen. I want you to follow along with me and see not just what it looked like when people were one anothering each other completely because they were filled with such zeal for following God. But look what happens to a church that offers intentional, authentic community to each other and to those around them. Acts 2:42-47. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold their property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Because community creates a safe environment for people to explore, to test, to experiment, to fail, but find forgiveness, and then be able to explore and to test and to fail again. But in that context, find that they belong. They will find safety to discover all God made them to be. And the church, the numbers were added to it daily. Listen, community is not a buzzword. Community is what you've been longing for. You just haven't tried it yet. Community is what the world's been longing for, and they're looking for it everywhere. They're looking to you. Community is attractive because in it, they don't just see the real you. They see the real Jesus at work in you, offering to them everything you found and providing to you the same value that you in community are offering to them.